Look, I don't know why some stories hit different, but this one's been living in my head for weeks now, and I think you need to hear it. It's about love and loss, and the quiet ways we keep people close, even after they're gone. And it all started in a library in a small town, where nothing much happens, and nothing much changes, which is exactly the point. This is the kind of story that makes you think about the people in your own life, about what happens when they're gone, about how we find ways to keep talking to them even when there's no one listening anymore. Or maybe someone is always listening. That's what this story's about, really. There's this library in Millbrook, Ohio. Not a big place. One story, brick building from the 1950s, sitting right on the corner of Main and Elm. The kind of library where the head librarian knows everyone by name and what kinds of books they like, and where the copy machine still uses dimes. The kind of place that's seen its town get a little older, a little quieter, but keeps showing up anyway with open doors every single day. You know the kind of town, I bet. Those small Ohio towns where the factories are closed or moving out, where everyone's been there for generations, where the library is actually a real anchor point for people because it's one of the only places left that's free and quiet and exists mostly to listen to what people need. The library's got that particular smell that old libraries have, dust and old paper and the slightly musty scent of thousands of stories sitting on shelves, all those pages breathing their own private breaths. The carpet's worn in patterns where people walk the most, and there's a kind of soft creaking to the floorboards that you hear when it's quiet. There's a checkout desk with a lamp that's probably been there since the 80s, casting this warm yellow glow on everything in the late afternoon. And the shelves, God, the shelves go up 8 feet high in some sections, and they're packed with the weight of every story ever collected in that one room. About 3 years ago, a young woman named Emma moved to Millbrook to take a job there. She'd just finished her degree in library science, was looking for a quiet place to start her career, and honestly, she was running from something. Her mom had passed away about 18 months before, and she wasn't ready to build a life in the city where every corner reminded her of the before time, every coffee shop where they'd met for breakfast, every bookstore where her mom would spend hours looking for something she couldn't quite name, every street where they used to walk together. So she applied for this job in rural Ohio, got it, and showed up one cold February morning not really knowing what to expect, just knowing she needed to be somewhere else, somewhere where nobody knew her, where she wouldn't run into people who'd say, "How are you holding up?" with that particular tone that makes you want to scream. Emma remembers the first day she unlocked the library doors. The building was exactly what she expected, quiet, a little musty in the way old buildings are, with shelves that seemed to go on forever and a checking system that still relied on index cards and a stamped date. It felt like stepping into a time machine, like the building had never bothered to update because it didn't need to. It worked. It was functional. It was beautiful in that spare, honest way. Her supervisor, Patricia, was this warm woman in her 50s who had worked there for 27 years and could probably find any book in the building with her eyes closed. She had that way about her that long-time librarians develop, this almost sixth sense about where things belong and where people are in the space. Patricia showed her around, showed her how the system worked, explained the filing, how to date stamp returns, how to handle someone who'd lost their library card for the 3rd time that month and was defensive about it, and basically left her to figure it out. Patricia trusted her. That meant something to Emma. And that's when the pattern started. Not that Emma noticed it at first. A woman came in. Older, probably in her late 60s, silver hair, moved slowly the way someone does when they've earned the right to take their time. She had that quality of someone who doesn't take up space so much as she exists quietly within it. She was quiet. Didn't ask for help finding anything. Didn't make small talk with Emma at the desk. She just walked directly to the poetry section, not a heavily trafficked area, kind of tucked in the back corner where the serious readers go, and found a book almost immediately, like she knew exactly where it would be. It was a worn copy of Mary Oliver's collected poems, printed maybe 30 or 40 years ago. The cover was soft from handling, the color slightly faded, the spine cracked from being read and reread. It looked like a book that had been loved. The woman brought it to the desk, checked it out with barely a word, and left. No small talk, no conversation. Just a simple transaction, the kind that librarians barely register because it's so normal. 2 weeks later, she was back. Same woman, same book, same quiet efficiency. Emma checked it back in and checked it out again, not thinking much about it. 2 weeks later, again. Same book, the same rhythm. Emma started to notice the pattern forming, the way you notice when a bird lands on the same branch every morning. At first, it's just observation. Then it becomes expectation. Then it becomes something you depend on. By the 3rd month, Emma started to really notice. Every 14 days, like clockwork, this woman appeared with the Mary Oliver book. It was so consistent that Emma found herself expecting it. She'd be shelving books on a Tuesday, thinking about nothing in particular, and she'd think, tomorrow Margaret will come in. And sure enough, Margaret would appear around 10 in the morning with that worn copy of poems, ready to swap it out for the next 2 weeks. Now, here's the thing about Emma. She was trained to respect patron privacy. That's the first thing they teach you in library science. You don't ask questions about what people check out or why they check things out. Your job is to be a guardian of that privacy, to understand that what people read and when they read it and how often they read it is nobody's business but theirs. But Emma was also naturally curious, the kind of person who reads library checkout cards like other people read celebrity gossip. She had that thing where she wanted to understand the story, wanted to know why people did what they did. So one slow afternoon, she started looking at the checkout history for this particular book. She pulled up the records and scrolled back, and what she found was remarkable. This book had been checked out by the same woman every single time for nearly 3 years. 47 times. Not 47 over decades. Not 47 over a lifetime. 47 times in the space of 3 years. That's every 14 days, like clockwork. That's practically a commitment. That's practically a relationship. Emma had never seen anything like it. Emma was fascinated. She asked Patricia about it during a slow afternoon in the stacks while they were processing returns. "Oh yeah," Patricia said, not really looking up from the stack of books she was checking in. "Margaret Winters. She's been doing that for a while now. Started about 3 years ago, right around the time her husband passed." And that was it. That was the piece that made everything click into place for Emma. The missing puzzle piece. This wasn't about loving Mary Oliver poems so much that you needed to reread them constantly. This wasn't about someone who'd found their favorite book and had to have it on rotation. This was about something else entirely. Something ritualistic. Something tender. Something sacred. Margaret was a widow. She was visiting her husband through his book. That's the only way Emma could make sense of it. The pattern, the rhythm, the consistency. It was like a conversation. Like Margaret was coming back every 2 weeks to say hello to someone she couldn't say hello to anywhere else. For weeks after that, Emma watched Margaret differently. She paid attention to the small things, the way Margaret held the book, not carefully, like something fragile, but familiarly, like greeting an old friend. The way she would sometimes take it to the reading corner and just sit with it for 20 minutes before checking out, not reading necessarily, just sitting with the weight of it in her lap. The way she seemed to relax once she had it in her hands, like she'd been holding her breath until the book was there. It was a love language, Emma realized. Margaret was speaking to her husband in the only way she still could, in margins, in spaces between words, in the small acts of return and ritual. But Emma didn't ask questions. That wasn't her place. She just checked the book in and out and watched the checkout cards pile up and wondered what Margaret saw in those pages that kept her coming back. What was she looking for? What was she leaving behind? Emma wanted to know, but she knew that asking would be a violation. So she didn't. Then, one Saturday morning, it must have been 3 years and 2 months into this pattern, Emma was reorganizing the poetry section. It was her favorite task, actually, the quiet work of it, the way you get to know the books when you handle them one by one. She wanted to add some new acquisitions, some newer poets, some works that might speak to a different generation. And she needed to make space, needed to shuffle things around to make room for the new voices. She'd taken the Mary Oliver book off the shelf to move it to a different location temporarily, just to clear that spot on the shelf for something else. But as she was handling it, turning it in her hands to carry it, it fell open to a page somewhere in the middle. The pages fell open the way books do when they've been opened to the same places over and over again. When the spine knows exactly where to bend, where the weight of repeated reading has created permanent creases. And in that moment, when the book opened and revealed what it had been holding all this time, she saw it. Handwriting, not printed text. Handwriting. Tiny, cramped, in blue ink, covering the margins of nearly every page she could see. Not just on one page, not just in one section. Throughout the entire book. Margins, spaces between stanzas, the edges of pages, the blank spaces at the bottom where a reader's eye naturally goes to rest. Notes. Dozens and dozens of small, careful notes, like a conversation that had been written over years. Each letter precisely formed, the penmanship careful and deliberate, the kind of handwriting that suggests someone taking their time, someone treating the act of writing as something sacred. Emma could see where the ink had dried slightly differently on some notes, where the ballpoint had gone over the same word twice in emphasis, where the hand had shaken slightly on particular words. This wasn't careless scribbling. This was someone pouring their heart onto the page, one careful letter at a time. Emma stood there in the middle of the stacks, not even breathing, and she read the first one she saw. It was on a page with a Mary Oliver poem about wild geese, about how the geese come and call you out into the world. In the margin, in the smallest handwriting, someone had written, "Thinks of you every time she reads this one. The garden came in beautifully this year. Your roses are still growing." Emma's hands started shaking. She felt like she'd just discovered a secret that wasn't hers to know. She sat down right there on the floor between the shelves, not caring who might see her or what anyone might think. This was important. This was urgent in a way she didn't fully understand. She started reading every single margin note, running her eyes over them carefully, reverently. They weren't about the poems. They weren't literary analysis or personal reactions to the text. They weren't the kind of notes an English teacher might leave in a student's book. These were something entirely different. They were letters, intimate letters, love letters, really, even though they weren't written to anyone alive. Letters to someone named James. Small, careful words cramped into spaces not meant to hold words. "The doctor said my knees are better. You'd make me walk the garden anyway. Miss you. M. Sarah's daughter had twins. You would have held them. They have your eyes. M. Rain today. We needed it. Remember that storm in 1987 when the creek flooded? You weren't scared. I was. Now I'm scared all the time. M. Notes written from a woman to her dead husband, updated regularly, returned with fresh ink and fresh heartbreak. Emma's eyes moved faster, page after page, searching, hungry to understand. Notes dated by season, the way you date things when time has become this strange elastic thing where months blur together. Spring 2021. The crocuses came back without you. I planted new bulbs where you wanted them. I think you'd approve. M. And Emma could see the implication. Margaret was maintaining James's garden. She was literally tending to his dream, keeping it alive with her own hands. Summer 2021. The neighbor's dog had puppies. Remember Cisco? These ones are golden too. I went to see them. Sat on the lawn for an hour. They reminded me you were still here somehow. M. Emma could picture it. Margaret, visiting neighbors' puppies, thinking of a dog from their shared past, the small act of connection, the way grief finds us in the most unexpected places. Fall 2021. The leaves are your color this year, burnt orange and deep red, like that trip to Vermont. Only without you. Everything's only without you now. M. And that last line hit Emma so hard she had to stop reading for a moment. Everything's only without you now. Not, I miss you. Not, life goes on. But this recognition that nothing is the same, that everything carries the weight of absence, that you can't escape it because it's embedded in everything. The leaves that were always autumn colors now meant something different. The trip to Vermont, a shared memory, now something that only Margaret could remember. Emma was crying. She didn't even realize she was crying until tears landed on one of the pages, and she panicked and wiped it away gently, carefully, like she'd just touched something sacred. Because it was. It absolutely was. She sat there for probably 40 minutes, maybe longer, reading. Learning Margaret's story one note at a time. Learning that Margaret had checked this book out every 2 weeks for 3 years, and every single time she'd brought it back with new notes, new updates, new conversations with her dead husband. 47 times she'd carried this book home. 47 times she'd come back with it, full of fresh ink and fresh grief and fresh love. She'd been writing to him the whole time. All those years, all those checkouts. That was Margaret's way of staying in relationship with James, of keeping him alive, of making sure he knew what was happening in the world he wasn't here to see. At the very end of the book, on the back cover inside flap, there was a note in different handwriting. Older handwriting. Blue ink, but faded, like it had been written decades ago and had slowly been absorbing the light ever since. It said, "To the Millbrook Public Library, with the hope that these poems will find people who need them. James Winters, 1983. Emma sat with that for a long moment. James had donated this book to the library 40 years ago. He'd probably never imagined that 40 years later, his widow would check it out every 2 weeks and fill it with love letters to him, written in the margins, shared with him in the only way that was left. He'd probably never imagined that these poems that his mother had loved would become a place where his wife could keep loving him after he was gone. She carefully closed the book and held it against her chest, the way you might hold something alive. And she sat there in the quiet of the library, between the shelves, and she thought about her mom. Her mom who'd been dead for almost 2 years. Her mom whose favorite smell was that lavender lotion that Emma still sometimes saw at the drugstore and would stop to smell, just to have that moment of recognition, that moment of here you are again. Her mom who used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings and would burn the edges because she talked too much and forgot she was cooking. It became this thing. Emma would watch the edges get darker and darker while her mom told a story, completely oblivious, and Emma would get up and flip them because if she didn't, they'd be ruined. She'd tell these long stories while the pan was still hot, and Emma would sit at the counter half listening and half laughing at how her mom could talk about absolutely anything and somehow make it matter. She'd start with some small thing, a news story, something someone said at work, and before you knew it, she'd woven it into this larger observation about people, or life, or the way the world worked. Her mom, who'd been loud and funny, and sometimes frustrating, and absolutely irreplaceable. Emma had been so busy trying not to think about her, so busy pushing away the pain of missing her, that she hadn't thought about ways to keep her present, ways to keep the conversation going, ways to say, "I miss you," to someone who couldn't hear it anymore, ways to keep updating them on what was happening in the world they'd left. Emma had just been trying to survive her absence, and it had never occurred to her that you could also honor it. Margaret had found a way. She'd found that book, and she'd made it a place where her husband could still exist, where she could still talk to him, where 3 years of grief and love could live side by side in tiny, careful handwriting, where death wasn't the end of the conversation, it was just a change in the language. Emma decided right then and there that she was going to do something. She wasn't sure what yet, but something. This was too beautiful to ignore. This was too important to pretend she hadn't seen. Over the next 2 weeks, she researched obsessively. She couldn't stop thinking about Margaret, about those margin notes, about the intimacy of that conversation that had been happening right there on the library shelves all this time, and nobody had noticed. She pulled the James Winters donation records. They were stored in filing cabinets in the back office, these old records kept in a system that made sense to Patricia, but that Emma had to learn the logic of. There was a small one-line notation that Patricia had kept in the files, written in old-fashioned handwriting, the kind you see in files from decades past. Donated by James Winters, retired librarian, in memory of his mother, Eleanor Winters. Eleanor, James's mother. She looked up his obituary in the newspaper archives, requesting old microfilm and spending an afternoon in the back room of the library reading it on a screen. James Winters had passed away 3 years and 2 months prior from heart failure. He'd been 71. He'd worked at the library for 35 years before retiring, which meant he'd probably known Patricia when she was brand new, had maybe even trained her when she was fresh out of library school and still learning how to handle difficult patrons and lost cards and the endless river of books that moved through a small-town library. He was survived by his wife Margaret, 3 adult children, and 7 grandchildren. 7. The idea of him not getting to know them all, not seeing them grow up, was a small heartbreak that Emma felt on behalf of a man she'd never met. His obituary mentioned that he'd loved reading, that he'd spent his entire career helping people find the stories they needed to find, that he believed books were how we say things we can't say out loud. He was described as a quiet man, but kind, a devoted husband, a good librarian, a man who understood that a library is more than just a building full of books. It's a sacred space where people come to find themselves. Emma found the local phone directory and called Margaret. She was nervous about it. So nervous. Her hands actually shook when she dialed the number. How do you bring this up? How do you tell someone you've read their private grief? How do you say, "I know your secret," without sounding like you violated something sacred? How do you tell a woman that you know the most intimate conversation she's been having for 3 years? Emma sat in the library after closing time, the building empty around her, and she almost hung up 3 times before Margaret answered. She rehearsed what she'd say. She imagined Margaret hanging up on her. She imagined Margaret being angry, feeling violated, never wanting to come back to the library again. She imagined losing this beautiful story because she'd been careless with it. But when Margaret answered the phone, her voice was so kind, so warm, that Emma just found herself being honest. You can hear warmth in a person's voice, and Margaret's was the kind of warmth that comes from a life well lived, from kindness practiced over decades, from the kind of person who answers the phone expecting the best from whoever's calling. "Mrs. Winters, this is Emma Cooper from the library. I'm sorry to call you like this, but I found something, and I needed to talk to you about it." There was a pause. Emma could feel Margaret's fear, her vulnerability, the immediate assumption that something was wrong. "Is something wrong with my book?" No, Emma said quickly. "It's perfect. It's beautiful. I read the notes. I'm sorry I read them. I should have asked permission first, but I read them, and I had to call you because I wanted you to know something." Another pause. "What's that?" "Your husband sounds like he was an amazing man," Emma said, and she meant every word. "And this book, I think it might be one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. The way you've loved him, even after he's gone. It's extraordinary." And Margaret cried on the phone, just quiet, gentle tears that Emma could hear in the silence between them. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. "Thank you for saying that. Nobody's ever said that." They talked for probably 30 minutes, Emma sitting in the library after hours, the building completely empty and quiet around her, just her and the phone line, and Margaret's voice carrying the weight of 3 years of longing. Emma learned that James had been everything to Margaret. They'd met at college, gotten married young, and built a life together in Millbrook. He'd been a quiet man, Margaret said, the kind of quiet that comes from actually listening, from actually being present instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. His love was the kind that showed up. He brought her coffee in the morning, sat with her while she drank it, asked her how she slept, remembered how she took it, cream and 1 sugar exactly. He built her a garden from scratch, turning a weedy patch behind their house into this incredible riot of color and life, spending weekends planning what to plant, reading gardening books, creating something beautiful. He held her through the loss of her parents, through the small griefs and the big ones that life deals out. He was the one who knew her better than anyone in the world, knew all her small habits and preferences and fears. He knew that she was afraid of thunderstorms, but loved rain. He knew that she hummed when she was concentrating. He knew that she needed silence in the morning before she could talk to anyone. He knew her completely. And when he died, Margaret didn't know how to exist in a world where he wasn't, didn't know how to be a person when the person who knew her best was gone, until she found that book, until she realized that a book he'd loved and donated to the library decades ago could still be a place they connected, a place where he was still present, still alive in some way that mattered. So every 2 weeks, she'd check it out, take it home, spend time with their old copy of Mary Oliver, and she'd write to him. She'd tell him about the days he was missing, about the roses that came back every spring without him there to see them, and the rain, the way it still sounded the same, but felt different, and the grandchildren growing up, hitting milestones he would have loved, about the world moving on without him in it, and how she was moving too, but differently than anyone expected. She'd describe what she made for dinner, tell him about conversations she'd had with their children and grandchildren, ask him what he would think about this or that. Would he think the granddaughter looked like him? Would he approve of the way their son handled his marriage difficulties? Would he laugh at what the neighbor's dog did? She kept him in the conversation. She made sure he wasn't forgotten. And by writing to him every 2 weeks, by maintaining that ritual of return, by keeping the book alive with her handwriting, she was saying, "You matter. You're still here. I'm still here. We're still us." Emma listened to all of this, and she felt something shift inside herself. She thought about her own mom, about all the things she'd wanted to say and hadn't had the chance, about the time she'd been too tired to go to lunch, and a few weeks later, her mom was sick, about the conversations she'd planned to have, but kept putting off, about the flowers her mom loved and Emma had never really paid attention to, about the songs her mom would sing, way off key, in the car. Emma thought about how you never know that your last conversation with someone is your last conversation until it's already over. When Emma hung up the phone, she knew exactly what she was going to do. She felt it in her chest, this certainty, this clarity that had been missing since her mom died. This is what you do when you see something sacred. You protect it, you honor it, you make space for it. She worked with the library director, with permission from the board, to create a small memorial reading corner. It took 3 weeks of planning and a couple $1,000s from the library's improvement fund. Patricia helped her, understanding immediately what Emma was trying to do. The two of them spent a Saturday morning with a tape measure and a sketch pad, trying to figure out the best location, the spot that would get the right light and have the right feeling. They settled on the back of the poetry section, this quiet alcove tucked away where the light came in soft and golden in the afternoons, where the afternoon sun would paint the wall in shades of amber and honey. It was a place where you could sit and read and feel the world slowing down around you. Emma brought in a comfortable chair, an old wingback that she found at an estate sale, worn but clean, the kind of chair that had held a lot of people and had absorbed a lot of stories. She added a side table, small and sturdy, good for holding a book and a cup of tea. She installed a soft lamp with a warm bulb that wouldn't strain your eyes, that would cast everything in this gentle, kind light. Emma painted the wall herself, spending an entire Saturday afternoon with a roller and a can of paint, working carefully, thinking about James the whole time, thinking about what kind of color would honor him. She chose a warm, soft blue, like sky at dusk, like the color of peace, like the color of quietness and reflection, and she installed a small brass plaque, ordered from a local engraver, that read, "The James Winters Reading Corner," in memory of a man who understood the power of words. And on the opening day of the corner, Emma had written a note of her own in the margin of that Mary Oliver book. It was right next to the last entry Margaret had made. In neat, careful handwriting, Emma wrote, "He'd be proud of your garden, and he'd be proud of you for never stopping talking to him. He'd be proud of you for coming here, week after week, year after year, and saying I love you in the only language you had left. This corner is for him. Thank you for showing me that love doesn't have to change shape just because the person we love does. I'm learning. My mom is in the flowers now. I didn't know how to tell her that. But I'm writing it here so maybe she can hear it. Thank you, James. Thank you, Margaret." E. When Margaret came in 2 weeks later, because of course she did, right on schedule, every 14 days like a heartbeat, Emma showed her the corner. Margaret walked in, following Emma to the back of the poetry section, and she saw the plaque with her husband's name on it, and she couldn't move for a moment. Then she sat down in that chair, and she held that book, and she cried. She held the book against her chest, like it was the last thing connecting her to him, which, in a way, it was. But they were different tears than Emma expected. They were the kind of tears you cry when someone has finally, truly seen you. When someone has looked at your grief and your love and your impossible, beautiful way of keeping your person close, and instead of thinking you were strange or wrong, instead of telling you to move on or let go the way people always do, they said, "This is sacred. This is worthy. This matters. This is how love works when death tries to take it away from you." And that's where they sit now, more or less. Margaret still comes in every 2 weeks. She still checks out that book. She still adds her notes in the margins, her handwriting getting a little shakier each year, but still showing up, still choosing to leave those words for James. Her words still finding their way to him, even now, even after all this time. And he's still there on the pages, in the spaces between the words, in the margins, and in the memories. The conversation continues. It's never really stopped. It's just found its rhythm, found its language. Emma sits in her library, in this small town that saved her when she didn't know she needed saving, and she reads those notes sometimes, and she cries for Margaret and James and her own mom, and she knows something now that she didn't know before. She knows that love doesn't end when a person dies. It just changes the way it talks. It just finds new places to live. People sometimes ask Emma what she's learned from this job, what the library has taught her, and she always thinks about Margaret. She thinks about how love is an action, not a feeling. It's something you do. It's showing up, week after week, with a book in your hands. It's filling the margins with your handwriting. It's refusing to let someone become silent just because they're gone. The people we love don't really go anywhere. They just change shape. Sometimes they live in worn-out poetry books, with tender handwriting all over the pages. Sometimes they live in gardens, in the flowers we plant and replant, in the roses that come back every year because someone taught us to care for them. Sometimes they live in the margins. Sometimes they live in the spaces where we still talk to them, day after day, year after year, no matter how much time passes or how the world tells us to move on. How grief counselors tell us there are stages. How books tell us we should be healed by now. Sometimes they live in the rituals we create to keep them close. Sometimes they live in the coffee we make in the morning the way they used to make it. Sometimes they live in the pancakes we burn because we're too busy remembering. Sometimes they live in the flowers we can't stop buying at the farmer's market because they were their favorite. Sometimes they live in the spaces in our hearts that never actually close. And if you know someone who's grieving, who's struggling to keep someone close, maybe instead of asking them to let go, maybe instead of telling them it's time to move on, maybe we could just sit with them. Maybe we could read what they're writing in the margins. Maybe we could see the sacred in the ritual. Maybe we could make space for it in our libraries and our lives. Maybe we could understand that love is bigger than death, and the ways we show up for it after someone's gone are maybe the truest test of love we ever get. The real measure of love isn't how you feel when someone's alive. It's what you do when they're not. It's the margins you fill. It's the rituals you keep. It's the book you check out every 2 weeks for 3 years. That's what Emma learned anyway. That's what Margaret taught her. That's what this library corner taught them both. And that's what I learned sitting here, listening to this story, realizing that I have my own margins full of my own notes. We all do. Every single one of us is sitting here with our own margins, our own hidden handwriting, our own conversations with people who are gone. We're all writing to someone. Every single one of us is writing in the margins of our lives, hoping someone, someday, will read what we wrote and finally understand. Maybe you're writing to someone you lost. Maybe you're writing to yourself. Maybe you're writing to God, or the universe, or the person you want to be. Maybe you're writing to your kid's future self, trying to tell them who you were before they knew you. Maybe you're writing to the version of yourself that existed before the loss, trying to explain to that past self why things are different now. But you're writing, and it matters. It absolutely matters. And someone, even if it's months or years from now, might find your words and feel less alone because you took the time to leave them. Might find your margin notes and realize they weren't the only one writing in invisible ink, weren't the only one keeping someone alive through the sheer force of their love and their refusal to let the story end. I'm writing this to you, right now, in this moment. I'm writing this because I want you to know that whatever you're keeping alive in your margins, whatever conversation you're having with someone who can't talk back, it matters. It's sacred. It's witnessed, even if you don't know it. Someone sees you. Someone reads your margins. I do. And I hope you hear that. I hope you hear it from Margaret and James, from Emma and her mom, from all of us who are sitting here in the margins, filling the quiet spaces with our love. And I hope you hear it from me. I'm writing this to you. And I hope you hear it.